Hey everybody, welcome back to another box office recap. Hope you guys been enjoying the content on the channel as of late. I have been shooting a lot of videos. I got the Jackass review to still do, and I just did my did a video about Supergirl. So I'm not sure if that will come out first or not, but we're here now at the box office recap. So not a whole lot of movies, but I mean some big movies, but not a whole lot of movies came out this month. But yeah, so let's just get into this. Now, before I do my box office recap, as I always do with all of these videos, I like to give you guys a little bit of a understanding as to how I measure box office. So normally what I do is that I look at the production and the marketing, right? And I times that by 2. So whatever the combined total is between production or marketing, say a film's like 100 million for production and an additional 100 million for marketing, I take that 200 million, right? 100 plus 100, 200. I then times that by 2, right? Timesing that by 2, that is the break even point for the movie. That is how much that movie needs to make in order to see a return for the studio. Now, in order to see that money come back to the studio, we have to also realize that theatrical distribution is also a factor here. So in this case, depending on the markets that you're hitting, you're usually getting a 50% cut between theaters and studios. So with that, you need to make even more money. So that 400 million that you need to see go back to the studio, in order to see that money come back, you need to times your global box office by 2, and the film now has to do at least $800 million in order to see that 400 million come back to the studio. So between film and distribution, 4 times the investment cost is what I go by. So I also go by any other related expenses. I include those like reshoots or what have you, and I also consider how those films can do on streaming once they hit those platforms, and if they're able to make up any costs that they didn't make in theaters. So hopefully that all makes sense. And yeah, so let's check out June and see how things occurred there in the theaters. So let's get into it. So the first film we're going to look at, the first film that came out, big film that came out in June, was Masters of the Universe. Me and my brother did a review for this. I actually did a review for this. So if you want to go check it out, you guys can. Yeah, man, this is rough. This had a budget of at least 200 million. No full disclosure on marketing, but as far as I've read, it was pricey. So I'm assuming we're looking at maybe at least 100 million. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm guessing. So investment wise, we're seeing $300 million packed in for this. So break even point on this would have to be $600 million. So gross requirement after distribution is taken into account. This film would need to do at least $1.2 billion in order to see that money come back to the studio. How did it do? Theatrical gross so far, $109.33 million. And this case for the studio, this case being Amazon, they're seeing about $49.92 million, or as high as $53.02 million going back to them. Yeah, this is a huge flop, a bomb, really. Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing about it is just what it is. I just don't think He-Man is a notable brand anymore. I don't think really anyone really cares for He-Man at this point. Um, I know that the 80s, it had its life, but really, also from what I've read in the 80s, it kind of fizzled out really quickly. Um, I know it has a little bit of an audience here and there, but it's not enough to pour $200 million worth. I don't think that was. I think that there was a poor decision for this. I don't think it needed that much attached to it. Film wise, it's also not the best either, at least to me. Reception was kind of lukewarm on it, but no one knows what it is. No one also really cared, So all that just kind of factored into this shaping up to be really the disaster that it is. So I think it's just a misconception of the popularity of what this is. Just because it sold a few toys back then does not mean that it's going to be selling stuff now. And clearly, that statement is holding some water. All right, next film we're going to talk about is Scary Movie. This came out the same weekend as Masters of the Universe, and well, as you can tell, it is night and day, comparatively speaking, between the films and their investments and which ones did better. Scary Movie, as far as I've read, has had a $30 million budget. I don't know the marketing expenses attached to it. I know there was marketed quite a bit, but as far as we know, investment wise, 30 million as it stands. Break even point on this would have to be 60 million, and then a gross requirement of at least 120 million. Theatrical wise, it has made $215.32 million. So studio gross, in this case Paramount, they're seeing about 96.48 million, or about as high as 101.65 million dollars going back to them. And a break even point of only 60 million, that is pretty darn good. That is pretty darn good. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's a lot to do with just the internet, just a lot of the talks, and also a lot of the horror, a lot of the emphasis on horror and horror-like characters. Scary Movie, of course, being a parody, of all sorts of horror. Um, so I think having all that, and also just pop culture in general, uh, I think that it was going to be more enticing for people. Is also small budgeted, and also Scary Movie is a somewhat notable brand, notable series. All that being packaged in, the horror element to it, the familiarity of it, the pop culture that's embedded into it. I think that that's what gave it a lot of benefit. It's critically, it didn't bode too well, but it seemed like that did not, slow down what was, shaping up for this film. So good on Paramount. I believe this is their first success so far of this year. So good on you guys. I would not be shocked to see another one of these sometime down the line, maybe in a couple of years. I don't think currently, it would make a lot of sense to do another so quick. But yeah, make it made some good money. Next film we're going to look at is Disclosure Day. So I did a review for this. Me and my brother went and checked this out. And yeah, not exactly doing the best. This has a budget of at least 115 million, has marketing costs of at least 80 million. So investment wise, we're looking at about 195 million. Break even point on this would have to be 390 million. And for that to be achieved, or to see it go back to the studio, we need a gross requirement of at least $780 million. So theatrically speaking, in this case, Universal, it's made about $193.66 million. So in this case, for Universal, they're seeing about 86.9 million, or as high as $91.62 million going back to them. So yeah, so this is another flop. Yeah, I think that it's a lot to do with just what I've been saying, for a while now. I know people have a very weird look at original content. They clamor for it, but they never go out and see it. Um, I mean, the film is fine. I didn't hate it. I know there was some chatter online for the film, some discourse back and forth, but really it was to do with quality. I don't think it had to do anything more so than that. Um, and it just generally people just didn't care. And I think that a lot of it is just that, and people don't want to think about what they truly want to see. In the case of now, it's horror and it's familiar IPs. And a lot of the talks online do sometimes contribute to trajectory for film. And Disclosure Day was met with fine reception, not like great reception. um, but yeah, so I just think that people just fundamentally just didn't really care. They got some attention because Spielberg and some notable faces here and there, but for what it needed to make, clearly it's not going to. And to give more credence to my point about Disclosure Day, let's look at Toy Story 5. Toy Story 5, of course, Disney, Pixar. Budget on this, 250 million, so much more pricey. I believe the other Toy Story films are like, I think they like progressively have gotten more expensive over the years. So I think this is the most expensive they've won. Marketing costs, we don't know for sure. I'm guessing at least 100 million based on Disney's practices. Just taking a guess. So investment wise, we're looking at possibly $350 million. So break even point on this would have to be 700 million. And gross requirement would have to be at least $1.4 billion. So where is it at so far? In this case, theatrically, it is made about $585.04 million. And in this case, the studio, why is that Disney? They're seeing about 263.74 million, or as high as $278.6 million going back to them. So I think this will end up doing fine. I think, Toy Story, resonates a lot with audiences. And I think that, for the brand, for where it is currently still with pop culture, it's still extremely noteworthy. And, um, I think with this and, with everything else that came out this past month, I think a Toy Story is going to have legs. So it wouldn't shock me if it ends up reaching the $1 billion mark and stuff like that. I do I do have some uh, caution, I guess, because Minions is coming out this weekend. So I'm wondering what that film is going to do in competition with Toy Story, and getting kids in the theater. So I'll be curious to see where Toy Story ends up, but I wouldn't be shocked if this ends up doing the number that it needs to do. Toy Story, like I said, huge in the pop culture and with audiences today. They Toy Story is just something that has always really been there. Kids and adults love the series, and clearly they're still showing up. So I would not be shocked if this ends up doing what it needs to do, but with Minions around the corner, I'm just kind of wondering what's going to happen there. So we'll see. All right, next film we're going to look at is The Death of Robin Hood, uh, which is kind of ironic given how this film performed. Ironic title. Um, this came out the same weekend as Toy Story 5. This is the Hugh Jackman A24, more kind of a gritty, darker tone on the Robin Hood story. Yeah, didn't exactly do all that great. This had a budget of at least 20 million, as far as I've read. Do not know the marketing expenses attached to it. So investment wise, we're looking at 20 million. Break even point would need to be about 40 million, and a gross requirement of at least 80 million. So theatrical wise, it's made about $5.09 million. And studio wise, in this case, A24, they're looking at 2.51 million, or as high as $2.75 million. So yeah, this just kind of came and went. It seems like no one cared to see it. Reception for it wasn't exactly the strongest. Um, it was kind of mediocre as far as I've heard. Visually, I mean, it looks really nice. My brother was actually kind of curious to watch it, but I think he kind of forgot about it. And same as a lot of other people, it seems. Um, yeah, so I think it was just a case of what it was competing against in that weekend. If you're going to compete against Toy Story, I think you better be something big. In this case, being something semi-original, I guess. I guess depending on how you look at it. I mean, it's Robin Hood. I mean, it's an IP. So, um, but yeah, it just did not work, or it just did not resonate, at all. But I think largely it has to do with release and what it was competing against, in my opinion. All right, next film we're going to look at is Supergirl. Now, we've talked about Supergirl before. Obviously, I did a review for it, and depending on when I get that video out, I also did a big video, talking about how I would personally fix Supergirl. How I would change the story, narrative beats, some stuff here and there. And the reason why we're talking about Supergirl so much is because, well, you look at how much this thing has done and the budget attached to it, it's it's bad. It's bad. we're looking at a budget of at least 170 million. We don't know exactly the marketing cost, but as far as I've read anyway, the DC did push for a little bit when it came to this movie. And, I evidence to that, like I remember seeing perfume commercials, some restaurants, advertisements, so there's been a push, in terms of marketing this movie. But I'm guessing around 100 million. Investment wise, then it would be about 270 by my estimates. Break even point would need to be about 540 million and a gross requirement of at least $1.08 billion. Theatrical gross on this so far coming out of this weekend, opening weekend, $68 million. And studio wise, this case Warner Brothers, they are collecting around 31 million or 32.9 million. Might be a little bit higher because this is opening weekend, so it might be more in the vein of like 45 million maybe. But yeah, guys, just to put it in perspective for you, The Flash, right? I believe I have the numbers right here actually. If I just pull them up real quick, because I had to check just to compare, how much it's done to other films, other lower grossing movies. So just so you guys understand just the severity of this, The Flash, when it opened on this weekend globally, made about $130.1 million. The Marvels made about 110 million on its global opening. Craven the Hunter, right, did about 26 million on its opening weekend. So there are films that are worse, right? There are films that have performed worse than Supergirl. However, there's also other parts of this. Domestically speaking, I believe only making about 30 million makes that, I believe, the worst, as far as I've read, the worst opening in superhero history, or at least is one of the worst openings in superhero history. All around, from top to bottom, this is a disaster. I mean, there's no good way of putting this. There's no good way of spinning this. This is just bad. Now, apparently, the producer, Peter Safran, I guess he was like, well, it didn't meet our expectations, which is putting it really, really lightly. And he apparently is saying that, oh no, there's no issues for the future of the DC universe. Okay, we'll see. I'll say this much: Millie Alcock's time as Supergirl is going to be very short. I know that she has an appearance in Man of Tomorrow, but I think beyond that, I think that's all she's gonna get. So, because yeah, no Supergirl 2. We know that for sure. But yeah, we talked about the reasonings for this in my Supergirl video. Obviously, going up against Toy Story 5 on its second weekend, it was going to be a bad move already. Then you have Minions coming out the next weekend. So it was already put in a poor release. You already have people, people are not as familiar with the character. They look at it as a female version of Superman, which in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing because that's in some ways, as far as I've read, the reasoning for her creation anyway was to appease and create a character for that female demographic. It just did not resonate, and reception was also down on this. So there was a lot going against it. I've seen some people compare this to the disaster that also was Snow White, and I don't think that this is the same situation. Snow White had years of controversies and stuff piling up on it, to which ultimately fed into the box office. This is not the case. I know that there's chatters online of some weird stuff here and there, which I don't care for and don't really think is all that weird, honestly. I don't think that contributed to this. I think this is more to do with just what it is, and where it landed in terms of the calendar. So, yeah, but damn, man. I mean, that is bad. That is just bad. I wish there was a positive way of putting it, but it is a really, really bad place to be. And it just really also puts things in jeopardy for this character, Millie Alcock's character, and putting it in an unstable place for the DC universe. at least if you ask me, because Superman also did not do all that great. I know people like to say they did great, but really, when you really do the numbers, at least to my scale anyway, it underperformed. So we'll see. We'll see where things go from here. But yeah, this is pretty bad. This is pretty bad. And the last film we're going to talk about is Jackass: Best and Last. Me and my brother went and saw this. Also, I had a good time with this. I thought it was fun. Um, Not exactly doing the best, unfortunately. Um, this has a budget of at least 10 million, and I don't know the marketing expenses attached to this. 10 million on the table. So break even on this would have to be about 20 million, and then gross requirement of at least 40 million. Theatrical gross, it is open to about 10.3 million. Studio wise, in this case, Paramount, they're looking at about 4.96 million, or about as high as 5.38 million. Might be a little bit higher because these are the opening weekend numbers. It's maybe around like maybe 6 or 7 million is where this film, Paramount probably made off this movie on its opening weekend. I think it's a lot to do with also uh, with what it is to some extent. I know that the film, isn't exactly doing a a lot of new stuff, which is what I said in my review. I wish that they had gone about doing more new things. I understand why in their literal sense, because these guys are a lot older, so they can't be pushing themselves as much. I still enjoyed myself. I still loved seeing, the older stuff and then some of the newer stuff. The last stunt in the movie was just hilarious. Um, but and that was a brand new stunt, by the way. But it's also kind of, in some ways, at least today, kind of limiting, if we're being honest, in terms of the reach that Jackass has. Jackass is to, people who, you know, grew up, maybe in like the early 2000s, the late 90s, and also North American, this is like not exactly something for the foreign market. And the foreign market didn't do all that great. It made like barely, I think, $1 million. Um, so it's more, specifically to this camp. And I think that the kind of humor also maybe doesn't really resonate with a lot of people. And also, this is the fifth of its series. So there's a couple things, reasons behind it. I mean, it's getting good buzz, but, I think it's a lot to do with a lot of those factors contributing to it. Um, so it's unfortunate, but, we'll see how things play out in the next few weeks. But I feel like this is probably just going to fizzle out because we got Minions, we got Odyssey, Spider-Man. We got a lot of big films coming out in the next few weeks. So I just feel like something like this is probably going to get buried. But it's a good film. It's a fun piece. If you have the time, I would recommend checking it out. It's a fun time. Just unfortunate that it's underperforming right now. So if you've been counting at home, that is about 7 movies that we had talked about. So a little bit lighter of a month. I mean, heavier in terms of the films themselves, but lighter in terms of overall quantity. And if you were paying attention to the successes compared to the failures, well, this is another down month. It's another down month, and this time packing, I think, larger losses than previously. Uh, Toy Story has yet to proven to be a success yet, but I'm expecting it to be a success based off of just the brand and how it's been doing so far, making over 500 million on its second weekend. Yeah, I mean, there's a good chance it probably can do well. Um, but you got a lot of things here also on the side, failures that people are just not that interested in seeing. I don't know who was really all that clamoring for Masters of the Universe. A lot of these other original or somewhat original offerings with Disclosure Day and Death of Robin Hood. If also a franchise like Jackass, which is seeing less return. Um, and then other stuff also with Supergirl, where people just generally also didn't have as much of a interest in. You know, Lots of things here that people just generally just did not really care for. And then you have things on the success side with Scary Movie and Toy Story, where they have things to them that people want to see. With Toy Story, it's the brand itself. It's a franchise that has been beloved now for over 30 years and is still proving today to be very, very strong for both kids and on audience for kids and adults. For Scary Movie, it plays on to something that I've said before. Horror is the thing that people like. Scary Movie is a comedy, but it is packaging in a lot of things of horror, and parroting off of that, as well as other things, of course. Um, so it's capitalizing on that stuff and being also in and of itself a franchise that also people are familiar with, that also plays to its strengths as well. So you have legacy here with these two series, and people are intrigued by that. Whereas with things here, you're playing with either original ideas like Disclosure Day, or trying to capitalize on brands that clearly people just don't care for anymore, or have not had to care for really at all. So and in terms of how this plays into the overall year so far, it's still a trying year, man. It's still a really, really trying year. We'll see what happens with the summer, how things play out, but it is still a really, really trying time. So, so yeah. So if June has shown us anything, it's a few things. One, don't be spending so heavy, because a lot of these movies I've mentioned are over $100 million, even for the original pieces like Disclosure Day. Got to bring these budgets down, and you got to be more realistic in terms of what people want. Some people, and I know people will talk about, oh, we want original movies, we want this and that. Clearly, they don't. Okay, that's not what they want. What they want is originality within their familiarity. That's what I've always have said, right? If you're able to create something that is intriguing and interesting within something familiar, you're gonna get more eyes on it. You're gonna get more eyes on it. And it's a little nuanced in that overall framework, but I feel like that's really what people are into nowadays. Purely original content, I don't think is true. In that respect, horror would be the answer to that. I mean, look at last month with Backrooms and Obsession. You know, more or less Obsession being an original piece, but horror does not have to be so reliant to franchises. It just, as a genre, resonates so much more than other genres. So, um, but we'll see what happens in July. We have some other big hitters coming out. We got Spider-Man, we got the Odyssey. Odyssey, I'm really curious as to what's going to happen with the Odyssey. That's a large budget attached to it. We got Minions this weekend, which I'm guessing is probably going to do pretty good. We'll see how everything plays out. But you guys, what are your thoughts on June? What did you guys see in June of the movies I had mentioned? Did you guys see any of these? And what are your guys' predictions for July? Let me know. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's gonna be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.